저기 지왕에메 남칭에메 사지티 삼다 단달라 저기 류된 개발제 된주 류된디 톱되어바텔라 된델 양아 저기 원dio 고바 토야기 아니 규사야당 안달바다 탐제 김벽 고바 토야기 아니 규사에게 개월주게 차상 줍투이 된 개발제 유예되래 아니 가사비 디바타제 샤야게 투이 된 개발제래 제가 데니기 된 개발제 될이야 저기 데니기 다도 유디 값될이야 아니 지게 가지고 고갑지 송제 아니 람사 다데네 양아 저기 안티본케르지야디 베즈시 오레스 이 마제바이나 아니 가지고 데 디본케르 베지 마제바 샤샤바이나 아니 지게디 가소레 시행해봐요 말레스 진행 제색 지왕에메 섬다 데니기에는 지왕에메 김센텔에 치비기 망보여봐 근데 순배긴 요아 아나서 순배긴 gen세라 소바야 가브리엘이야 치비긴 교요레스 데네자다 도시네 인지미징에바 도스점 다장 저기 디본 그룹지오레스 다데네 지오레스지 온도시네 데링 쇼여가도 디고시로다.
Good afternoon. This morning we continue to look at the chapter on the certainty of death as well as the uncertainty of the time of death. So all of us have achieved a human rebirth, and not just any human rebirth, a precious human rebirth, a rebirth which is difficult to achieve and therefore is rare, and a rebirth of great value in that, independent on this precious human rebirth, we can accumulate the causes that will lead to further excellent rebirths, as well as the causes that will lead to the attainment of a mental path that will lead to the eventual achievement of enlightenment. But this precious human rebirth is impermanent. We relate to it as if it is lasting, but it is going to come to an end. And it can come to an end so very easily, as we saw this morning. There are so many causes that surround us, both without as well as those within us, that can inadvertently lead to the end of this life. And the purpose of this meditation then is to lead us to this habituation with the understanding that this precious life, I must utilize it well, not let it go to waste, but rather strive to take its essence. In other words, to accumulate the causes that will lead to the eventual attainment of enlightenment for the sake of others. So this then is what we continue to look at this morning.
대화 되바래 동아 미되바래 제가 개와 치마 남소 양아도 동아 먹고 같이 디기 영화에 탑람디 다데네 베즈시하고 그래서 디 베즈시에디 저기 아니 저게 동아 영화에 규디 아니 미개와디 그래 제가 정야마 미가와 사샤바이나 데니 디바디 바샤고 샤지 메버스바이나 아니 규메버 샤바이나 엔제고 동아 영화디요 말레스 강아요 말레스 당아주 디기 영화디 아주 디기 고고서 세델에 디기 고바나진 개와 치마라양아주 디기 고고래 띵기 대와 디기 고고래 제가 디고야라 규디 개와 두고고래스 제가 개와 사고래스 규 개와도 두바이나 사바이나 아니 제보 디기리 용그래스 제가 된다라 닝보라 아주 동아여 유미가 와샤 아니 디기 영화 규 개와데 다데는 두고고래스 너는 이거 무슨 말이야
All of us, we want to experience happiness. None of us wants to suffer at all. This is the state for all beings, whether human or animal, that everything we say, do or think is motivated towards the achievement of happiness and the overcoming of problems. And all experiences of both happiness and suffering, in other words, wanted experiences and unwanted experiences, they come about independent on causes. So if a wanted experience comes about, an experience of happiness, this has come about in dependence on causes. And an unwanted experience, an experience of suffering, this too has come about independent on causes. So now whilst we have a rebirth where we have the attainment of a precious human rebirth, where we have access to the Dharma, we can accumulate excellent causes that will lead to ongoing human rebirths, causes that will lead to eventual freedom from suffering in its entirety, the attainment of enlightenment. Recognizing this, then, we commit to developing or recognizing this through these meditations. We develop an ever more focused, determined approach to cultivating the causes of happiness. And this is done through accumulation and purification, where accumulation is the developing the habituation to wholesome ways of thinking. And the purification is breaking our habituation to afflicted or unwholesome ways of thinking. This is how we create the causes for ongoing exit rebirths and our ongoing spiritual journey. Now we will come to the third of the reasons for this root meditation, the root meditation being the uncertainty of the time of death. And now we come to the third reason, the contemplation that the body is extremely vulnerable, so the time of death is uncertain.
Sumba ni lu chu uatar shindu nyamchungwe nyoba chimbo migo baras sarma suba tabu rere yang ni do ne so chigbe na chigin tamje yi shombar yang shindu la des.
So in the handout, we're at the very top of page 100, and in the published book, near the bottom of page 87. The body is vulnerable. The body is as vulnerable as a water bubble. Therefore, any little thing, such as the thorn piercing it, may be responsible for destroying life without the need for major harm. In this way, it very easily succumbs to all the causes of death.
툭제나 매바차르 게루 매바차르로 이루로 근데 룽슉 침보제나 매바차르로 제상한주 류세디 추오당시레스 오다르 류추오다르세디.
This human body, this human life, is here likened to a water bubble. And a water bubble, as we know, it doesn't abide for long at all, and from the slightest of cause, it immediately disappears. So too with this human body, this life of ours.
신도 냠초를 인비 김자가서 네버 침보 미고바 네버 침보 구구 말해서 네 세마 수바 세마직 베네 강바다 라바디와 세마 수베네 데네 춘주지 수베 니기 안에 바지게 가소레 냥아 잡제 나즈 차샤 다제 디기 견진 시저 용고레세 세마 수바다 버레레 장 년도 제네 소직베나 소지루고 시지와 된 용고레세.
Then a reason is presented showing just how vulnerable this body is, this body that's been likened to a water bubble. Any little thing, such as a thorn piercing it, may be responsible for destroying life. So just a mere piercing by a thorn can lead to infection and death. So this just goes to illustrate how very vulnerable our situation is.
어디네 자다 지긴 담제기 녀바야 신도 라데 지산 치유의 견데 영한 저기 난기기 가소레 이기 소샤 미다미 마인 바데 뒤로라서바 지긴데네 여바 안디멘베기 치기 셈젠 소메베기다 사주미로라서바다 데니기 안지게 게멍부 여바 데서 차상에 간데시네 지긴 멍부 되는 여바 데니기 여바 지기 제외나 아주 류르네 소바이나 디긴 제나 저게 안지기 마 시에게 시루고 데네자 아주 류디베지 시엘이야 가소레 시 레라보슈레세진 셴바의 신도 라데스. 치원 치킨 탐지기 전발에 신도라 치킨 탐지에서 대신 저거 치견되는 거죠. 견망보여를 난 소소샤다 소자마인바다 대소 견망보여라로 되네 견지기 아주 수보는 소바이나 디 견지네야 시도해요 거래서.
In this way, it very easily succumbs to all the causes of death. So this morning, in the previous section, we looked at just some of the many causes of death that surround us, both the animate and the inanimate. The animate including other humans, animals, and unseen beings. And the inanimate, this would refer to the external elements. So, for example, expressed through natural disaster, or our own the elements that our body is comprised of being out of harmony, leading to illness and possible death, as well as other inanimate conditions that can lead to death, such as accidents and so forth. These surround us. And as we saw this morning, it's almost miraculous that we are still alive.
And in a sheeting less, the Najibarabasha sheeting less, Sada Lumbo Jason Yimadun, Bawe Sebe, Lujen Dida Yang, Tawa Yang, Luber Miguna, Shindu Nyamjum, Mida Mujugus, Muji Salasa, she sonsos.
Then Lama Tsongkhapa shows the source that for this view he's presenting, and that here he's quoting from Nagarjuna's letter to a friend. If not even ashes are left behind when bodies such as the ground, Mount Meru, and the oceans are incinerated by the 7 blazing suns, then what need to mention extremely vulnerable humans?
아니 야 니마 샤시 니마 차와진 베네 두 신앙아 저기 니마 직샤 이샤 니마 뒤윤로 되네 샤야도 먼저 점리 차상 안 책제 탈라나셔 쇠제 매바 차야다 아니 야소티기네 감진 추강야 매 감추디게 감 되네 아니 르럽티게 파치 되네 점리티게 체제가 매바 말아바제 탈라나지도 시수고래제 사다 룸보다 야소다 안데서 니메 등의 체제 Barriers, Mebarche, Barriers, Serpes, saying the Dinaluka, Semjanda, Mida, Dina such a Chasaka, Mebache, Talana introduction, Segores, Jezade, Benangazuki, Gasosia, the Bemas, the Chambo, Chushu, Top Chambo Yobata, then on the such as the said the Top Chambo Shure, then this again, talk with the Yobana, this Nimik Sija, Talana, the Sugur was order, Barriers, Serpes.
What this verse is referring to is that this very world of ours, something that is immense and appears so stable, this too will be destroyed. So we see in the second line this term, the ground. The ground then we should understand to refer to the earth, this very planet. And all that's on the planet, these many vast oceans, the powerful mountains, everything within our world will eventually be destroyed. So whilst we may think the planet itself is always going to survive, even it will be destroyed. And it will be destroyed so completely that not even ashes are left behind. So this is the situation of our earth. So too, of course, for us mere humans.
Nima Jiksha, then Nisha, then the Tusha, Tower Church, then the Chudi Gam, then the Zishin de Gam, on Gansam Jilia, and the Chigasali and Mebachi, me Tisha, Dushan, then Gansam Jilia, Gaya Meba, and the Tisha, Tawana, and Sushi, Dushin, Chagore, said the Zemli Jidro Nadi, and then Sungor, which is the Redo. Jisa Denegi, Zemli, that Jazo Chambo Digi, Denegi Gam Tuyada, Sangan, the Zemli Saji Chambo Digi, Denegi. Tawana and Sutuina, Manjig me looted be, Yamchuja was or me looted, and Yamchuja de Lamsa, Ducinem, Tralado Chuja, Yamcho, the Negi, Gaya Mevalago Gomer, Jeza Deneza, Shindu and Yamchung, Meta Muchi Wesses, Jezanganjig me looted, that Denegi, Shindu, Yamchuja, and it Gialia, Jiga, Ganese, Shehua, Lamsa Chigres, as Sungor, Michi Salse.
This is drawn from the Abhidhamma, where it's presented that the earth will end in this way. It will eventually be completely eradicated. All that's on the earth, the great oceans will dry up, the mountains will be destroyed, all the great structures, and the planet itself. So if something that appears as invulnerable as this very planet is going to be destroyed, then of course, ourselves, who are so extremely vulnerable, we too will die.
mi tangbo mi gan skia war de ne skia de ji ka sa tangbo mi de celo be ring bo de ne cel tung do ne celo ju bo do yor se on do sine de cha na anda gansam chi lian de ji ge gan chi ru re sine ji de mi de ge ji da da de ne zembling cha sa ji je me ba cha da de de cha ge re se je do sine song yor wa di je san di song war de.
It's in the Abhidhamma text that is presented how our world is formed, how humans came into our world, and this was mentioned last night, and also then how the world will be destroyed. So this is all presented in the Abhidhamma texts.
제상하는 삼나래야 오더 타보다 균티의 템포 치우 되게 선배 삼로데 노트리스 제상 긴 충충지기 파 니겐다제 아저리 남상 지초초로 요레스 제상 타보 템포 삼로나로 코와나 나와나 신도시 삼다와나이 타보 템포 요 말레스 매바엔자다 긴 충충지기 지초조엔자 네게디징에바 매바레 제상 마지 빠라들이야 니엘랑아 저기 고급 렌제 네 디본 계속 제거레스 돈다지스 뭐.
So if there are causes that can and will destroy our very world, then certainly there are causes that will lead to our destruction, our death. And the whole purpose of this point and what preceded it is to shake up this notion of stability, of us being permanent or unchanging, and lead us to a determination to take care of our mind and ensure it's always in accordance with virtue, and thereby we strive to accumulate, as well as to purify, to keep our mind away from coming under the influence of the afflictions. Now we come to the conclusion of this route, which is the decision that is necessary to practice the Dharma from now. Contemplating in this way, reiterate many times your heartfelt resolve to practice the Dharma from this very moment, for it is uncertain when your body and life will be overcome by death, and you cannot assume that you still have time.
donala nga zuge de xinye le gang le ya ane chiwa nge ba namchi nge me ane namchi nge me su chine ane chiwe je chwe ma do gang ye phen ba yo ma re sa ji samda jeza da chiwa nge ba so namchi nge me du se samda de donala tene samda we je la so de de dar sen de xinye le chiwa da namchi nge me samda yumje mang bo je de de se ju ruwa on de ne ge samda ne de samda be thala thamale so sambe tarrasa dan anje tamadile kan samgorasine da chidagi lu so nam 좀 ngeba mebe 지자 da chidagi anje 단주기 된 루진 톱톱바디 chidagi genje gidi ngeba mebare saje 도시네 meba mebe ne 도시네 민도스베 되네게 삼다제 오다 되네 김sen 망고 삼도 오다 되네게 genje 뭔가 gidi ngeba 민도아 선배 삼고래 시로 삼당고래서 하고 그래서 대지 되네 삼당에도 오다 기디칭에와 민도와 선배 삼로지 하고 그래서 뭐게봐 매배해야 돼.
The order of the English and the Tibetan is quite mixed in this sentence. So it starts with contemplating in this way. So this then links to what has come before, both in this route as well as the route before, the reflection of the certainty of our death and the reflection that the time and manner of our death, though, is completely uncertain. So that is what has been contemplating in this way. Then in English, we then go to, and a little bit was missed, so it starts with, for it is uncertain when your body and life will be overcome by the Lord of death in the end. So I'll just read the next bit again. For it is uncertain when your body and life will be overcome by the Lord of death in the end. So this then refers to, having contemplated in this manner, we reflect that this life will end. In the end, it will, our life will end, and it will end because the Lord of death refers to us having uncontrolled death, death that is under the control of our afflictions and the karma that our afflictions have produced. This is how the life, each of our lives will come to an end. Therefore, the conclusion is one needs to strive to accumulate and purify.
And then denegi anda gedi chengeba mebari samne dene long yu mijawa seda da ngai jema chigi se pa yang ne shaya meba shaya dusu mindu chesa ya maja baje o denegi jewene jema lo jema chigi da de jelo lo jema chigi pa shawene pa long yang ruwa dene maja wa je long yu mijawa da de maja wa je da da ni ne chu jawa 타주고래서 타주 시장이 다되는 다 드리는 파 다들하는 파는 게 주체 냠 디본기로 냠 지인선에 셈리아 타주고래서 다 타주 지인습에 타주가 지고래서.
And reading the sentence in the same order as the Tibetan, so we're starting at the back of the sentence, and you cannot assume that you still have time. So this is the very reflection from this route, that this life is going to end at any time. And therefore, now we come to the beginning of the sentence, reiterate many times your heartfelt resolve to practice the Dharma from this very point. So this is the final conclusion. The previous route, the certainty of our death, ended with the conclusion, I must practice the Dharma because this opportunity is going to end. Now that we see that this opportunity can end at any time, the conclusion is, I must practice the Dharma from right now. This is the resolve that this meditation leads us to.
Yeah. Deda samba sede sambege ta deda samba sede dejinel she ganzo hasan shuyedi bene chiwa namchi chiwa ngeba namchi ngeme ne ji lu nyam chwa sede da chiwi kin de ne yore lu shin samla mangbu tangje tangde han tama dela di samla tawi ge drebu tama lo garli ge resena 제가 오다 남치 ngeba 민두와 매바에서 다 relation 돼 두수 기네 민두 내 다티네 자다 디본케로데 지긴 산베게 삼로디 두시네 리기레스 제산디 삼로 다 쳐봐지 데니 디린 다들랑 다다네 송데 디본케로 지긴 산베 삼로디 야네야 땅고레세 시에 담망도 자서 담세데 오 지긴스네 켈렘바 담자 소소 셈려야 두시네 켈레제데 망도 시고레 야네야 두두 시고레세레
with how the sentence started, contemplating this way. To be clear, this refers to the conclusion of both of these first routes, having reflected on the certainty of our death and the uncertainty of the time and manner. We have come to recognize that this life is not stable, and therefore we come to make this firm decision, or this heartfelt resolve, that there's not a moment to waste. So much of this life has been spent in distraction, and distraction means not necessarily a distracted mind in the sense that we usually think of it, but drawn in the pursuit of things of no real meaning. And the resolve, the heartfelt promise that one makes to oneself is that whatever one is doing, I will do so within the context of the Dharma, with a mind focused on the Dharma and not a mind of the afflictions. Even when I'm going about my ordinary activities, I'll do so through the lens of the awareness of the Dharma. And this then is the heartfelt resolve that one comes to.
Tesa kasani na dirin show ngazo samdaya dus mangbo chi gyumche mangbo samdaya she di denege samdaya da tama la lo kie di dire da ngazo kie la di samdaya gyumche bu de la khara ki wasene tesa da denege chue me jo ko dusu kya mi dong da den chue nyam ne jigin sembe ta chue ge samlo di kie di dire da di da ni ne chue jigin sebe chue jawa chue jigin za ta chue be samlo di du kie ge don da la kesin da di jure yan che ki she ba di samdane jevo tamadala odadengi dadane chönyamne dibon기로 지긴 세베 셈네 다 줘봐지 다 맞은 탑민다 지긴 세베 다 줘봐 셈 예고래서 리삼도 기에 된다라 아주 가상키니 다시 디레나 쇼게다 셰바제 세아디 삼로 디기에 된다라 시고래 당은 디 삼로 디기에 고고래
Still staying with the sentence, the very final words in this point, which for us is a little earlier on in the sentence, reiterate many times your heartfelt resolve to practice the Dharma from this very moment. So this is the final part of the sentence. It's the conclusion of these two roots. It is this very determination, a heartfelt resolve. So this is like something carved in stone. It is a deep and sincere commitment that from now I will practice the Dharma in all circumstances. In other words, one will keep one's mind free of the afflictions, but with a motivation of the Dharma.
That is a denegi gumze mangbo samda gumze samda denegi gumze mangbo samda do su jebaje samda de tamadera odadi gumze mangbo tong and denegi sam chik gumze mangbo samda de ngaro samlo nala de ji shebana o takwa tembo shigi mare sembe gyuning bu degre sembe samlo de gyön tong dene gyön tong odadi nojo yimba da hago jezada gidi shinge ba meba tendere do sembe samda o dene ma chedi ma jende tabmin o sembe gida ngeba tingni jeba je samlo yakbochi dele tugo re jezada di da na dirine randinge da chöche ba ta shigin jigi sembe samlo shukchim bu yobaina ne gidi na jugi 디본기룹지 배수치 용어를 제가 삼로디 여바이는 아주 디본기룹이고 다지 삼로디 슈크춤 메디 는 아주 디본기룹이 약보치레 투고 말아 제가디 삼로디 약보시게 된다라 여바니네 되네 김제 먹고서 제바제 또 디네레 제시 먹고 야고도 김제 일이다.
With all topics of meditation, and certainly here too, to bring about the desired change requires meditation based on knowledge. So meditation, this word that can be translated as habituation or familiarization, when translated in that way, we see the need for repeated and sustained meditation every day, again and again, on the same topic. But and the need for it to be based on knowledge is because meditation, to transform our way of thinking, needs to be done with reasons, not merely repeating to oneself, I will die, I can die at any time. Just merely repeating that will not lead to change. We need to convince ourselves. We need to look at the topic, in this case, the impermanence of this life, but it's the case for all the meditation topics. We need to use reasons so that we can look at it from many different points of view and thereby develop a conviction, become convinced it is like this. And in that way, we will be able to let go of what isn't important and rather focus on what matters. And this is to accumulate virtue, in other words, to strengthen our habituation to wholesome ways of thinking, and purification, to break our habituation to unwholesome ways of thinking. Without going through this process, and again, it relates to every point of meditation, this process of gathering knowledge and then repeatedly over a sustained period meditating on that, using reasons in both formal sessions, formal practice, as well as reminding oneself as one goes about one's day. Without doing that, lasting change won't come. The mind, when we apply it to the Dharma, will remain easily distracted and quite weak and flimsy. It will not be a powerful, focused mind. But a powerful, focused mind will come from meditating in this way.
sada jitar yarbo lu neme guime der neba dece ni na nibo lang na chi guibe jime ki gangse na ge gui so na janya dece jigir yu chi sa shi sungpa taros.
Then Lama Tsongkhapa establishes this with a quotation from the letter to King Chandra. Lord of the earth, as long as this borrowed body stays happy without sickness and without decline, take up the essence of this very life, become undaunted by sickness, death, and decline. One day when faced with sickness, old age, and decline, you may remember, but what can you do then?
Sada said, Ningazuki Saki, Dapo said, Chirade Sada said, Milia, the Kangba Dapo Jinda, Sajura Kuran, Kangba Dapo Kuran, and she Sada said, Dapo Kuran, Sajura Sada, Sisine. Jider Yerbu Lucide. Jizang Ludi, Yashavana, Jumashi, Jubik Lucide, Chizan, Shandagi to the Yashavana, Yerbo Lucide. Benangazuki, Mi Shandagi, Dangan social motor Mevache. And Kurang motor the Nimusum railing all Yaroche say by that motor Suzuki Yaro Nimusum run the Pijata Vada, the Yashavarava. She's a Nimusum Zos and Pajawara, Social Gedina Yomarava, and Pajawara. And Dina she runs to Ludi, Jumo Shiller to the Yashavanashi, Yarbores, Yarpos, Yashavan, and getting danger. Mijikba mutin the temponia yomares cook Jimma shadow. She's not Yawana Yava the Jevi Jalade, Negab Nya your day, Tenja Yomer, Par Meva Chauros, and that is Shandal Pa, Jesana Mever Charo, and denashing out Ludi, called Yabores, Yarbos, Tenja, Tendo Mineba, Namjisene, Nimicil Gito, Ludi, the Hesser, Chesanchita Lu, Yabu Lu serum.
So this letter is addressed to a king, Lord of the earth, as long as this borrowed body. So this analogy, or this usage of the term borrowed body, this displays the kind, or illustrates the kind of attitude we should have to this body, recognizing that we are merely temporarily making use of it. Our consciousness is like a guest in this borrowed body, in this guest house of a body. And the reason for using this term is to remind us that we are only passing through. We are only temporarily do we have this body. And what's so skillful about this term is, if you recall when you have hired something, particularly if you've hired it on an hourly rate, you'll put it to good use immediately and you'll look after it. You will not want to abuse it because you will be returning it soon, and you'll put it to good use so you can achieve your objective as quickly as possible. This is the approach we should take to our body. We should look after it, but we should use it well and use it from this moment forth.
Minebadi, and Dade Gablia Anzole, Neme, Guime, Der Neba, so that Anzole, Lutile, Nemeba, and the Lula, Guiba, Maguiba, Nushu Yoba, Guime, said Nushu Yoba, rather, Guiba and the Nushu Meva Charora, Chesam Guime, said Nushu Yoba, and Lui Debu Yoba, then the same Dewa Neba, Denigi. Lule Nemeba, Lule Nushu Yoba, Lu Detang, Yubike, Negaptella Neba, Negaptella ya, ta, Deni Tsena, Nimbo Lang, the Nig Yubi Gaptella da, Manzu Karchwas, Nimbo Langores, Nimbola de Carson, Dipo Point and Georgia the two courts, Gewachima, when you go want to be at him. Tarbata Temji Kimbo about the Yamlendi, then a Chehores, and you will answer the Yamlan Chehores or Jeza, then the Chehores, name Guime, tell never, the Nits and Nipolangs.
It continues. As long as this borrowed body stays happy without sickness and without decline. So this then refers to that. First, that the body is without sickness, so one's health is at least okay, And we have energy. So without decline refers to lacking energy when one is just too exhausted to move. So as long as one's not that exhausted, one's health is okay, and stays happily refers to one's mental state, that one's mind is at least not tormented by sorrow. So in other words, when our situation is merely average, that is sufficient, we should then strive, the third line, to take up the essence of this very life. So the second line also implies that we shouldn't wait for all circumstances to be beyond perfect, but how we are now is good enough to strive, the third line, to take up the essence of this life. And this expression, taking the essence of this life, refers to living a meaningful life, or to live a life where one does what has great meaning. In other words, to accumulate and to purify.
나치 구비 지메기 세대 제자다 마들야 데니게 데니 더블 갑텔야 닝보랑 딕봉 계룹 제제 아니 마오바나 아니 나와 지기 냠len 제바이나 마주엔 나와다 가와다 치위 구발에 타르지네 아니 타르베 고바 토야기 토바이나 직바메바 가와다 나와 구발에 직바메바디 다데네 제나 제하고 꼭 유지버레스 안 제호레스 제 다덴 두셰바이나 치위 갑레네야 아니 가서 둥아메바다 아니 시나메바 셈제메바 아니 두셰네 제 고갑데 다도 여바레스 올당하주기 남의 나치 구입에 지금에 봐서 나야 나 치에 매봐 구입이 교보차에 매봐디 쇠데 다들 탑시데 다들 주비하게 다들 대로 고급이 되래서 제가 다들 좀더 줍투봐요 그래서 근데 다들 땡텔이야 저기 냠렌제 곰 잡티니 셰베나 안에 타르비 고바 토바이네 되네 내가 녀모랑 매 치와래 탈 안에 치와래 탈바던 구발에 타와 지파죠 말와 되네게 곰제 두시데 다들 땡텔이 제베나 제 고급이 되래서 안디마상 저기 시위 갑레이네야 셴나메바 안에 치와래 미직바 치와라 마직바 다딩한주 개와야보도나 오다 시베네 개와치마데 땡야고 토구레 세상 디텐레 냠네 제 디기 두그레 선베게 유디다 지바요 말아봐 근데 개와 마도바네 시는 오다냐와께 둥아딩아서 둥아용거서 지바용 거로 세상 다디 땡텔레야 마주 류네메바 류뉴슈여바 류대다여바 땡텔라 아니 닝보랑 디바봉 기룹 제고레스 디냠네 제바이나 아니 디봉기로 약고 제바이나 아니 개와치마 시엘양에 시나요 말스 개와치마이나 원도 고바데 디텔레 디기도 두고래세 지네레 야 마세 안다데 땡텔레 양아서 냠네자 타르베다 탐제기 보고 토바이나 데네 가와다 나와나 치위 지바 탐제를 줘와레스 제사 데네기 줘위 고갑디 다데 냠네제 다들 고갑 요레스 제사 다데네 제고레스 두스모레 네 아니 나치 구입에 지메기 said 지소를.
Then the fourth line, become undaunted by sickness, death, and decline. So here in brief, what is being stated is, now is the time. Don't allow yourself to be beguiled by the thought that tomorrow or next week or next month may be better, or even worse, the thought that, oh, well, next life my situation will be better. Now is the time. Do not assume one's situation may improve. You may be at the peak of your existence for what remains of this life. Now is the time. Do not delay for a future time. Embrace this opportunity and relate to what remains of this life as an opportunity. So cultivate a positive attitude, not being daunted by any illness or death around oneself or one's lack of energy, but rather embrace this opportunity in a positive manner and strive to accumulate the causes that will benefit in this and in particular lives to come, the causes that will eventually lead to liberation from suffering and enlightenment itself.
di cena dipong kirupche majebache tu shashabaina anya kapshulia da nganjuge gangche sede gangche na gu sede ngajole lule ya kapshulia lule neva chike dene gengo cha gui ben lu gui ba se de ben nyam chu ju be top ma nyam ro de kapla dene jen yang se de o da nga chue chi ho se bi chen bai na ya den je yo ma le ji de se ji ge chi ji san chue chi tu ya yo ma le ka se lu le na ze ge kem a lu le nu shu me ba dene ge ji dene 교부 차야도 최제와 삼바이네 최제 두 말에서 지금 고급 나서서 쇼사래 지금 강야 특히 강야 제해요 말해서 제야 대세지 지금 최제와 삼바 젠바이나야 최제야기 니슈요 말에 최제 두 말에 지금 강야 제해요 말해서
The quotation concludes with, "One day when faced with sickness, old age and decline, you may remember, but what can you do then?" So this we should use to spur us now with the recognition that whenever this life ends, when we can, if we are in the position that we can see the drawing to a close of this life, we may then desperately want to accumulate causes to ensure at least a good rebirth. But we may not have enough time. We may well not be in the physical shape where we can practice without train our mind without distraction from pain, for example. Likewise, our mind may be dominated by worry because we know the end is coming, and therefore we'll struggle to train our mind in virtue. So whatever our condition is right now, and whatever period of time is left in this body, now is the time to, with a positive attitude, to utilize the energy that we have to train our mind, recognizing that this may be the very best opportunity that we have.
And then I'm going to do Jukures, Gudi Sahores, Gusabaina, Ditebu Tiki Yungures, or then the Gusahores. That Chigi, Shimashavana, and Chidana Kishavan, Gusahores, or the Kura Diu Guina, Diu Gudi that in the Yam Sahores. That's how other Gadasauras, some Notanji do some dangore, then some done the Gudires, or watch the Gusahores, then dealing on the Chidane, Chison and Jurakiran. Mom by the DJ and the Kura Lobsang Dorje or Kura DJ or Gusa or Segu, Dinashi the down to you. Kura Kiwachima Digi go winner, that in the Kiwachima Digi and Gudi, that in the South over is. Jizan Kura that is Subo Tambo Yuba, Sai Nuba Yuba, Goa Yuba Dilla, Sa Sana, Yapur South Tuba Chores. Mom by the Socialia and Subul Nuba Meba, near Nazich, Dinisha and the Ganga Tedu Kapla. The
essence then of what is presented here is that recognizing that we all want to be happy and free of problems and difficulties, recognize that this comes from causes. Recognize that this comes from causes. Those causes, the only person who can accumulate the causes are ourselves. We will experience the results of our efforts. And the causes that are to be accumulated come about through our way of thinking. So on the one hand, this is very similar to the process taken in society. On the other hand, it's a little different. In society, if we want to achieve something, we know we need to get educated in that particular skill, or we need to train our body in that particular skill. So this certainly will have a mental component, but it may have a physical component too. And the more one applies oneself, the greater this skill will be that one develops. So this is similar here in terms of achieving happiness, with the only exception though, it's about training our mind. How we express our mind through our speech and through our physical behavior, this is important, but it's primarily training our way of thinking. And the more skill we gain with our mind, then the greater or the more powerful the causes for happiness will be, and the weaker and eventually complete eradication of the causes that will otherwise lead to suffering. Now is the time to engage in training our mind repeatedly, consistently. Do not assume better circumstances will come. Now is the time.
당한주 지소알야 아니직 디기 두야기라 체텔야 디기 두야기 탑람 규로지 망고사고라 그래서네 디기 요야야 칼라 수볼야 아니 디기 요야야 수볼야 칼라다 도로다 지수 베제 땅고고로와 제산 디 요야 규디 아지게 응으로 매는 요야 고고로와 제산 디 규디 요야게 탑람 딜랑 쪽이다 레가레야다 디니신 규디사 디 규디 다 베제 땅 제양 줄리 디기 두야디 지고로와 강아세야다 벤네나세 맹강조서 다제 강아세야 데네 네 칼라사지 룰리 디기 두야다 데네기 제사 데네기 규사고로와 제사 디 규사 딩한도 지팀비기 지용원이야 차상기지 디고로와다 나나 저게 나은추에게 좀된 디기 마데시ገብ도 제사 체 디점기 디기 여반 빼나가서 로딜이야 디기여나 디링 디기여나 상이 디기 고고로 와지자 디링 디기 상이 강아 체네 디디 말로 와지 디링 디기여 바나제 상이 디기 고고래 달로 디기는 바나 로 제마 디기 고고래 디 나신다 체델이야 디기 고바는 개와 치마라 디기 고고래스 제상아도 띵이 그디네 대화네 대화 무투제 그디네 대화 장자도 고고래스 가서 고고래스 마도 제 logically the mongbo je logically yakanga mongbo theden didigo marwa sesan ten mudine digi ko wores sesan mudine digi go de se dizam janga zu benjo tinggen rupje ane digi anjuge mudikewa chimegi digi ruptu mares sesan da tingi dewa gedine geden dewa ruptu mares dedikewa chimagi digi rupya de kare tone ruptu goresen nang samle thane ruptu gores warda nang samle thane ruptu gore 지난 띵이 대화대 나삼로 톤을 쭉 그래서 되네 인자 당한주 다들 수부 탕보 여바 디기 여바 고급 여바 삼로 나야 뉴버 여바 될라야 도시네 삼로 땅고 그래 삼땅제네 삼땅와네 디기 주비 규지 사고 그래서 삼땅다데 그래서는 오당이 가서 나서비 디바디에 파샤 나 대위 개와 주긴 선비게 삼로 땅디 삼땅에 뒀는데 개와 주비에 가래서는 아주 어다 류가 예수 요건에 샬랑이 누가 지금 매 세배 삼로 따야 디수치 디르와 디수따야다 안디마제 안는 소수기 류 롱저 가리네 디수게 셴 디기스 주야다 아니 셴기 동화세야 되날 파땅기 세배 삼로 따야 아니 셴기 소설이야 녀버르체나 파 코로 말아봐지 쇠고금 셴리야 파 코로 말아봐지 좀 hö시시시 돼야다 셴리야 추녀버 기원 지파 거 닝지검 투야 지기 세배 삼당 고레스 디소 삼노디기도 장제 안 디소 냠네디 무디니 지긴 빼야고래 되네게 삼다 무디 지긴 세도 존주 차차 안 되네게 수다 안 될래 하와진네 되는 가지게 딩해진 셈 제시베 딩해진 주야다 안 다음에 봐도 베시랍 온두고미야 두수두스네 삼당 고레스 디소 삼노디기 야 곰제 야예 공원에 원도 슈치까지 슈치르도베네 제가 체딜래야 아주 동아 용아 아니 되게 마와 아니 개와 치마이는 원료고 바로 땡데라이나 되게 야고야야 안 되는 그 도시에 야기로도 땡이 되어 탈바세 톱안 탐지긴 벽고 도이니 땡이 되어 토야도 용거레스 지산 도시는 3리톤의 장을 줘고레스 송거다 또 나님 보디
So in society the presentation is expressed not as directly as in Buddhism, but the meaning is very similar. If you want a particular result, you need to achieve those causes. If there's a different result you do not want, you need to refrain from those causes. So the talk of cause and result, this is largely absent in society, but the way of thinking is the same. There's something you want to achieve or do not want to experience, then adjust your behavior accordingly. So in the teachings of the Buddha, he makes very clear that all that we strive to achieve is in order to achieve happiness. We all want to be happy and never to suffer. And this wish for happiness is something we wish to experience today, tomorrow, throughout this life, and throughout lives to come. So in Buddha's presentation, he emphasizes lives beyond this. that in these lives too, the happiness that will be experienced comes about independent on causes to be accumulated. So therefore, we should think of the entirety of the future lives that lie before us and accumulate causes that will have a positive impact throughout this and lives to come. Moreover, Buddha made very clear, and we can see this from our own experience, our own lived experience, that lasting happiness cannot be achieved by material conditions. Otherwise, those who live in excellent countries or have an abundance of wealth or fame or power will be happy. But this is not the case. Happiness comes about through changing one's way of thinking. If one is skillful in how one thinks, whatever material circumstances one has, whatever outer circumstance one finds oneself in, having taken care of one's mind, being in control of one's mind, one will remain happy. So therefore, the very focus in Buddhism is on changing our way of thinking. And this is the entire technique by which we not only achieve happiness in this life, not only achieve happiness in future lives, but it's how we progress towards enlightenment, by changing our way of thinking. And how to think, to express it in brief terms, the determination not to harm, at the very least, not to harm physically and not to harm through our speech. But ideally, we should be subduing our mind so that our mind is not expressing harm to ourselves or others either. In other words, restrain our mind from coming under the influence of the afflictions. That's the first, ethics. The second is generosity, developing a wish to give of ourselves to others, not seeing ourselves as an isolated, self-contained island, but rather a wish to give of ourselves to others, to interact with others, to help others wherever we can, in whatever ways we are skilled and can help. The third training is that of patience, which is the commitment to never responding in an afflicted manner. Initially, this may just mean staying silent or not getting involved, but ideally the practice of patience is an expression of one's training of love, compassion, and wisdom. A truly patient practitioner is a practitioner whose minds of love, compassion, and wisdom dominate within. For such a person, patience is a natural expression of interacting with otherwise challenging circumstances. The fourth training, that of joyous perseverance, this is the training that all one's endeavors in virtue to do with enthusiasm and to do so continuously, not sporadically. And then fifthly is the training in concentration, and sixthly, that of wisdom. These six together are how we accumulate not only causes for excellent rebirths, not only causes for happiness in this life, but it's how we progress towards liberation from suffering and enlightenment itself.
Dinigi dangan du chine samdang horese dinigi sungoro dinin zada dinma ya karsore gawales dine zawasumgi nane gai chisho de namji ngeme samba dini yimbi bebar jawo se dangan ya zawasum nane jige chiwa nge bada namji ngeme sadi odu samdane de namji ngeme samdadi ge chisho res 지선 남친 기디 칭해봐 요말다 삼삼도 다데네 최제고래 선배 삼로들이 두고로 지서 디나데 사오스면은 남친 예매 삼다도 베기 쉬셔래 해서지 델야 베주진의 삼당고래 해서죠.
Lama Tsongkhapa concludes this section with, among the three root contemplations, the contemplation about the uncertainty of the time of death is the most important. So you should put effort into it. So this started a few pages before this outline. And it's imperative that we train so well that this influences us at all times. This understanding that this opportunity we have is not only finite, but it can end at any time, and therefore to put it to good use.
Zanda Anzuki, the Chiwa Mitavasa, Chiture, Shivi, Mangbo, Dusutinda, Anzuki, Luigi, Kitina, Tianja, Chiture, Kichi, Yutu recipe, do some day, that Chiwa Mitavasa, that Delma, do some day, that and the Lorin Tower and the Tower by and Chipachi, Kichi, Chitu recipe, some time, she's not up at Tempo Yoma, Gitina, Chiro, Chi, Mangboresa, Ting Anzu, Lulia, some danache. These some time tone and Chilogi. Chi Jalala so Sosuki Jala, J Jalare, and then Chi Tihinlaso, Chasan Jigbata, the Sugi Gen Chi Jiagi, Trolade, Gen Mangbo Yoba, Chi Gen Mi, Nang, Semjana, Semja Maimbi, Gen Mangbo Yoba, Gen Trolado Shuri, such the Mitava some Tachibarwa. Do some time the Carapanto Yoris and Dine some time. Now the Gabriel Jalabe, Zachimo, Sosuke, Zinangachimbo, Zachimo, shoe some daddy. Massage, Trolation, Charson, but the same day, she knew that best as a Jella was Charson, the same day, the same much, but she would do a Jungorwa. Just a Denigi Mita was on, they didn't charge was called Mitavare, call your child again, bear Mambuyores. Just a Giddy Chang, have I a Giddy Trollot and ever your was. That didn't change it as a Trollot over. It's called that Trollot Joshua didn't check and do you check and see the Jigjosh was just a Mitavares. Mita was a dinner something, Mita was some time when then you Trollot over and a bear, same day that Ganga Jungo mother. That's called Gidina GM about Tabu, Unibushi would do somebody, Pashuchun Dangorwa. Dineza, Dinigi. Sosuke Jala Modaya Winada, Sosuke Jala Karapuida Wina, Desupa, Trola Drovene, Dine, Sosuke Mitawa, some Davena, Semte Yun. Dime Bigedan, Zuge, Jigga, Garoro, the Ime Tumbuju, and Sosuke, Cancele, Sosu Dropo Tumbuju, Bache, Gabriele, Mitumba Chasana, Diane Gabriele Adange Dropo, Mitumba Chasa, that's Cardis or Semte Hujan as Yongua. Since that this is Mitumba, Miduji and Delia, and Yahweh about the Meva Chag again, you can bear bong Mongoyo. Just like game Mongolia, Kidi Meva Chang ever your Maras and be sometimes that didn't change treasure to Charles on it. Didn't meet up what the Kyo Rosho was and some time and Yansam Liakanga Chunga Yungo, Jizanga to do to meet up again to some Danangi to some Danadin, Daxin Shu Chundu. And the Ganga March 1,000 Shu Chimbu Yobanza, Digi Ganga Digor, 1,000 Shu Chundu, 1,000 Shu Chundu. On the Jala Trella Doba that didn't see in there, Dizigi Semlia, Sem Pombuda, Miss Makiva de Yungo Male.
So as we've been looking at now for some weeks, this life that we've all achieved with great effort in lives previous, this life which has such value, is impermanent, and therefore this opportunity that we have to accumulate causes to radically transform the future trajectory of our lives, this opportunity is impermanent too. And not only is it impermanent, it can end, especially as we've seen this weekend, it can end at any time due to any one of a number of potentially harmful conditions that surround us and are also found within us. But in addition, when reflecting on impermanence, whilst the primary meditation is in relation to this life, this opportunity, we should also relate it to everything, almost everything else. Because in reality, everything you own is impermanent. It will come to an end. In fact, everything you have ever seen or will see, or heard, or tasted, or touched, or smelt, all of this is impermanent. And if you also develop this understanding of impermanence in relation to everything that you interact with via your senses, changing it, that will change your relationship with them. It will lead to this wrong view of grasping at permanence, weakening. This means you'll relate to things in a more realistic manner. And whenever we interact with more wisdom, we interact far more skillfully. So, for example, people often have, amongst their possessions, there are those that they particularly cherish. This could be because they are very, very valuable and difficult to replace, for example, a nice car, or something of great sentimental value. And it may be something that which is of sentimental value, may have no real material value, but if it's lost, one becomes distraught. So this way of thinking, whilst commonplace in our world, is not at all in accordance with reality. And these are very clear illustrations of grasping a permanence. And it's experienced when what one grasps at so tightly is lost. Then the mind becomes distraught. But if one is skilled in the Dharma, one's way of interacting with the world and oneself is vastly different. If one's mind is well trained, and one understands that everything one interacts with, our relationships with others and material possessions, everything we interact with via our senses is impermanent, as well as the vast majority of things we think about. Our mind will become much more relaxed and spacious, because we will not be grasping tightly, wanting things to go in a particular way, and being upset when they don't. We will interact with things much more lightly, understanding that everything that arises to us arises in dependence on causes. And we have a responsibility to accumulate the correct causes, but even us striving to accumulate correct causes does not alone lead to desired results because of interdependence. When this understanding is deep, then we move through this world striving to accumulate correct causes, but not grasping tightly at desired results, because we understand that those desired results come about on a vast number of causes, some of which are in our control and some are not. This means our mind is much more relaxed. And with something that maybe is that you own, that's very valuable or very precious to you on an emotional level, when that is lost, one's mind will be light. One may even laugh rather than become distraught. So this, I encourage you to take this meditation deeper in this way. In particular, what is explicitly presented in terms of the impermanence of this life. This is the main topic, because that transforms how we live this life. And as that's transforming, think deeper on impermanence. Recognize our relationships are impermanent. They come together in dependence on many causes. Further causes are required to keep relationships, for example, together. But those causes, but sometimes those relationships have to part. This is just the way things are when they are impermanent, when they change momentarily. So thinking in this way helps us to move through life in a realistic manner with a mind that's spacious, that enjoys the causes that one is creating, but isn't grasping tightly at desired results. And therefore, when things occur in an unwanted manner, one is light with those too. This way, the mind stays spacious and at peace and happy.
Di na shen a zige da so su ge lu long jie cha san xian li a pen bi xian dong a xie da de gi zhe bie chu de xian le dang gi xian bi sam de ne ge dong sam ji gong ba du xiang bei na nyam len du xian sam dang bei na an de so ni ge wa re di men bi ge da de ne ka ble li yang zhe ge jia la ro gu ma shuo da de ne gi mi gu ma shuo la so ba de ne cha so bei na da ka ble ng zo o de ge jia la ya bu de gu ma shuo sha sa de mi kuma de dujares na kuma de ya che khora lang so so simma ji wa chya yung go ro da de yung go ro ba chi san de ne ka bla nga ju ge nam yu ne nga de ne ke da ngi lu lo sha na ya jin ba dang yin se be sam ta ba ne che ba ka ro se ne de ne ju kuma sho ba na o da di ring ngi ji cha la ko kuma ku sha ko ku zhe da ko lo ya pen ba ne de ge che pen ju ngi ko le jin ba yin se ne ko lo pan do yong wa sho se sam da sha ba ne 당이 루노제 샹레 팬도르제 당긴세 병에도 넘인 되는 삼는 당규에 디른 코로나 등이 마제베나 코로나 체로바데 야고 주는시 코로나 팬도 야고 용어쇼서 베 삼다샤베나 또에 삼바다샤베나 되는 심는 강아지 메레 심리야 안 심리 강아 메바 소소리게 되니게 동위에 삼바다디 진 개와사바 진이게 판도 용거래. 제사때 되네게 매바자 당에 구마고 샤페 두자레 선데네 가제 제베나 잘라수라야 요마로와 라야 매바체 소소레 셈체제 다 구마딜 미디베 두자레 코구마가 샤페 지 두자레서 콜야 직 식수라 되네게 삼다이도 아니야 지 디바사 제사 디바도 스트레스 체요로 제사 되네게 sabla 되네 구마 쇼베나 소소게 남미네 되네 삼다웨나 오다티링이 코즐야 미 구마체데 코라 야고죠 코라데 펜바지 야고 용어쇼 단지 넘뷰닝이 아니기 잘라당 가리나 샹리아 판도치도 당긴 제긴 선배 삼는 당규 디링 코라케르 야고 춘샤 코라는 판도 야고 용어쇼스베 삼다샤베나 두시네 제바네 소수게 셈바 셈표식식 제 아니 소소리아 강하메바 안디가리아 두시 동의 셈바 땅에 되네게 개와사바 소수의 기후 소수의 개와사바 되네게 판도 디용고르다
The training in generosity is something that is much easier to engage in with an understanding of impermanence, certainly to engage in a wholehearted manner. If the mind is light, it's easy to give. It's easy to give even things that one otherwise would find difficult to, because the mind is light and the mind is more focused on being of benefit, of giving of oneself, than of holding on to one's possessions. And for example, when one meets an unwanted circumstance, perhaps one's house is burgled, and many things that you value and you need and you make use of are stolen. Normally, of course, one would be distraught. One would certainly expect it to be normal to have aggressive thoughts towards the thief. And if they were caught, you'd want retribution for the harm they had caused you. But this way of thinking is afflicted. And not only is it afflicted, it makes you suffer then and there. But if you're trained well in impermanence, your mind will be light. You may even laugh at this expression of impermanence. What was here one day is gone the next. And it came about in a way that's quite unexpected. And one's mind is light. And especially if one's trained further in the Dharma, further than just with impermanence, one will recognize that the thief, they clearly had a need for what they took. And therefore, you let them have it. So in your mind, you readily let go. And you do so with sincerity, not just a mere expression of words. But it's now gone. It's not mine. Even if they develop a sense of remorse and they return it, it is theirs. I give it away. And the outcome of this is manifold. One, you are much happier. You're not walking around telling your friends about what has happened and how unfortunate you are in this terrible person. Rather, your mind is quite light and joyous. Moreover, you have strengthened your habituation to wholesome ways of thinking, rather than strengthening your habituation to the afflictions, in particular, the grasping at possessions and anger towards those acting in a way that one doesn't like. So this is an illustration of how the Dharma is supposed to be. It's supposed to pervade our very way of thinking. This is how the Dharma is experienced in our life. By changing our mind, it changes how we engage with the world, how we engage with other people, how we engage with possessions, and so forth.
Disugi debu dunga yungore, kangare, rangale, kanga, shanlaga, rashinjikala, kanga yungore, esaj, jirwa. Da di dokcho la, ne kewa tukore, sidi, da jige, shen, lunga is nichutubi, surim sonya, tang, shanla, jamba, tang, zewa, da, nije komore, esaj. Disu komba na, disu kewa re, dele teni debu, an dewa yungore, rangale, dewa, shanla, dewa, tukure, esaj, kasang samdana du sherwa. Du chine samdamba, du chine dinige samdamba na, di pai kare pando yore se na, 나 데니게 삼다리 판도 가려운 거래서나 아주 두스제데 Bene, Desa, Yahapta, Pensuma, Mangu Yagurwa, Chizma, Dangan Zugas, or Daddy, Yahaptilia, Nugate, Kambo Mango, Dukja, Sambe, Dadanzuki, Tachi, Konla, Junguru, Konla, Sema, Dukja, said, Midi, Digi, that Jiggy. Never Gije, Shanlia, Mi Mongo Suson, and the Chicamo Mongo Torson, Dukja said, and Anzuki, some Nalia, some Chicanga, Shanlia, Gunji, Kolia, Magawachi, some Mongos Lido, Dinganzuki, Sosolia, same Makiva Chichia. And that be Dukja, could meet Yahoyama Smith party, nigga, some died the Shanlia, didn't she do, and Sosola Divasago, what Dakaje, this hour. Jeza, the nigga did Divashaw. That thing Anzuki. Tibi Jibu Kewa Kasa Dunga Yunguri SMP, Digi Samtan had a Carpengorasina. Jeza Shengi, Chigi Maja, Shanley, Turjum Jevadi, Penima, Diniturjum, Mitila Carlevare, Coila Duecha, Conto, Naya Gedurda. Naya, that Digi Jibu de la Shanley, and the Jima, Japchenic, Turjum Jimisuata, and the Chige, Kambala Soba Chalata, Duja, Jibu Dungadi, Shanley Dungadi Yunguru, and the Corona Gibume, Shanley Dungadi Mutua. Jezada. Nyombe said the dinner, Chesan Cogula, Dueshaki, Kondroki, Ajaki, Ninji Midi, Ninji, that Coron Dibo Bottom of Sagores, that Be Coron Moba Nagangan, Ninji, Sembe, call a Ninji to war, Tangazu Dinigi, sometimes called Ninji, Ninji Combina, and call ya Bedujare, Cope, Yawa, Mara, called Gangati or some Yungoma, call it Ninji. Chisa Nangazuki, Ninji do social Kewasagore. And she Colia, Dukja, some of Matas, Ninji, Chisa, Denigi, some Dabigi, Chesa, that Digi conjugate, Yomo Betibu, Dunga said Consusandalia, Campatoria, that Michia, the negative Dunga, Botman, Yonga Chavare, that consulate Ninji Sabe. Penziniga, Ninja Samada. Chesa, Denigi, Ninja some delay to war. The Ninja Sambaleva. That's in a to Quinzinda, Shannon knew somebody may want to so in there, and the same just play Chida, Chica was like Kiawatu to it, so to get Niamlin Shuksha to war. Remember, dinner some Matavena, and they go bear Quinzin, bear Dujar, near some say, dinner some Davena, so to get Chica somebody. Dozen shooting Dawa the shoe church in the social Makiva, and the jig decoy in the same Kivu Mevada, jig, the nigger some the Yana Tadu, Nia Makova, and the Kalasana Kivu Mevade, you are again in a Chagua. The Nenza, the Nigi, the Sing and Zuge, Dipon Kiruchi, Tibo Bonko, as a Diba, the Dutcha, that Dim, Ditibu Dumare, Diba Sagan, the Ninja, Yawa to war, some Dana Digi, Dusniam Digi. Denigi, Maja, that didn't hold the order, called Majahan, Pajodelia, Chico Condosadia, call and Duecha, Horonga, Yule Chapa, Chashin, Chemboche, Controche, Najaje, Duchen, Digida, call a Ramidilla, Rao, Mara Ninja, some time and Duchen, some time and to Kawasagora. She's a dineza, dishing of the Dibon Kiruchi or recipe, some Tanati, Deeper Jevan, Dinit. Ganga take it some dana di Pingor Denish, Yamnajalia. Just I didn't get some dana di some dana di Janjo digi, Dangazuki, Ganga that chair that didn't couple ya should be shut down to war. That was Bishop I did a chain Yamnaja said, the nickel be shut down to war one.
So previously I've mentioned, and I'll mention it again now briefly, part of the great benefit or the great importance of this topic is not just that it's the entry into the Dharma, but the understanding of impermanence in the broader sense is a basis for later developing definite emergence, bodhicitta, and the wisdom realizing emptiness. This meditation on impermanence, therefore, is of incredible value. And just like in the previous segments, I mentioned how relate your understanding of impermanence primarily to this life, because we need to enter into the Dharma, but also much more broadly. You can also use this understanding of impermanence, which is very closely linked to dependent arising, because things change, because they've come about independent on causes. They have parts, therefore they change. So this reflection on impermanence is the entry point to the later reflection on dependence arising. And in terms of our relationship with other people, our interconnected relationship, our interdependent relationship. And that's the basis for the later development of compassion. So through this reflection on impermanence, you'll develop a determination to want to engage in the Dharma ever more. This will lead to the expression of the determination to abandon the afflictions, because this really what it comes down to. Abandoning the afflictions from our own mind, all expressions of negativity, whether directed at ourselves or others, attachment, anger, ignorance, all of them. And rather, to cultivate a habituation to the opposite ways of thinking, wholesome minds as generosity, ethics, patience, love, compassion, and wisdom. That is the practice of the Dharma. And one enters into it through this reflection on impermanence, giving one the focus that is required. And then when you take it more broadly in the way I've just guided and will again now, you'll start to experience the world quite differently through this lens of impermanence. So, for example, in our world today, there are many expressions of violence, whether within families or between peoples or between nations. So hopefully this is just something as individuals, we aren't experiencing those ripening results, but we're just observing it from a distance. But when you do observe it, I advise you to be on guard with your mind. Because when, for example, watching the news, it's very easy when seeing violence for the minds of the afflictions to arise within us. It's very easy to choose a side and for hatred or anger to arise within us towards another side. Or if we've held views for a long time, even resentment will also arise. So I encourage you, when observing things such as this, to be on guard of your mind. And when you see the afflictions arising, or you know they may potentially, immediately apply antidotes. Because if we don't apply antidotes, and we watch, for example, the news, or we hear about the events in someone's life from a friend, and we're not guarding our mind, and the afflictions arise, all that we achieve is we accumulate non-virtue, and we suffer. Nothing good comes from the arisal of the afflictions. We become unhappy, and we strengthen our habituation to non-virtue. Rather, remind yourself that what you are seeing, what you're observing, what you're hearing about, is the coming together of a number of causes, ripening in particular results. It's another expression of dependence arising. And there's a sequence of causes that have been accumulated that now are being expressed as violence. This has come through the afflictions. The root causes of whatever it is that we are observing are the afflictions. Within the minds of the individuals who are the decision makers, and within the minds of those carrying out the decisions that have been made. From ignorance follows attachment. From attachment follows anger, hatred, and expressions of violence. So when you are observing the news, for example, with this understanding, you'll recognize that all parties involved are suffering, not just those whose homes and family members homes have been destroyed and family members have been killed, but so too those perpetrating those acts and the decision makers behind that. All are victims of the afflictions. So here, the challenge is to recognize, is to engage without taking sides. Doesn't mean that the one side is not perpetrating harm on the other, but to recognize all involved are suffering beings. And therefore, thinking like this enables the arisal of compassion for all involved, not a partial expression of so-called compassion, but expression of compassion towards both the perpetrator and the victim of the violence. So this is important, otherwise one will not be observing this as a Dharma practitioner, but just as an ordinary person with resentment arising, anger arising, self-grasping arising. And from this, the mind is likely to express, at least on a mental level, perhaps on a verbal level too, hostility. And then we are not so different from those involved, because our mind then too is obviously afflicted. So this is quite challenging, but this is what we need to do, to take the Dharma, have it infused with our mind, so that all that arises in our mind, we experience it through our Dharma training. This then clearly will lead to our mind being much more relaxed, much more spacious. Thereby we'll be able to give rise to genuine compassion. In this illustration, genuine compassion to all involved, without any wish for retribution to come to one side or the other. So this, again, is another illustration of how one, as a Dharma practitioner, not merely as a Buddhist, but as a Dharma practitioner, how one should take the teachings and have them very much integrate into your very way of thinking, into your very being. And where this happens, where you see this happening, this shows accumulation and purifying, because the mind is less afflicted, more virtuous.
All right. Then say that is choose Yamlin Chevadi, Mazakanga Tilly Gablia, and Delia, Mazuki, some not to win it, the Rangale, Pempachi, Ranshan Nigale, Pempachi, or just a Dangazuki, that didn't Casan that Dundeshi, then I said, or do send some dad, yes, and you body that. Then they say, and that is so.
We'll conclude here. And I encourage you in between now and when we meet again in a couple of weeks, take these points, reflect on them again and again, focusing on what has value and letting go of what's transitory and has no real lasting value. Okay. Then thank you. Thank you very much.